The Munich Security Conference is underway in the Bavarian capital today. Russia is absent in the conference, but its newest ally has its back, it seems. The Foreign Minister of China delivered its address on the second day of the security meet, voicing support for Russia. He openly blamed the West for creating an alarm over European security and called out the United States for acting against globalization and uniformity.
In the past few years, the most frequently discussed topic at the MSC was uncertainty. And this year, it has been replaced by a sense of helplessness. All this reflects the deep confusion among nations about the current state of the world, as well as their widely shared concern about its future. Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, cautioned expressly many times that the world is at risk of division and major countries are expected to shoulder their responsibilities and live up to international obligations. As China sees it, this warning is no alarmism. Indeed, our world faces once again the danger of division and confrontation. Certain big power is reviving the Cold War mentality and stoking confrontation between blocs. It willfully wields unilateral sanctions and undermines international rule of law. It puts together various circles and stirs up antagonism.
The West has been voicing its growing concerns over the growing closeness between Russia and China, especially their alignment in opposition to the US hegemony. Their recent meeting, visible bonhomie and open support for each other, has led to the perception of a new world order. And the Western leaders have accused both the leaders of trying to replace the existing international rules.
We cannot let this stand. We're facing a blatant attempt to rewrite the rules of the international order. One only has to read the recent communiqué issued by Russian and Chinese leaders. They seek a new era, as they say, to replace the existing international rules. They prefer the rule of the strongest to the rule of law, intimidation instead of self-determination, coercion instead of cooperation.
The presidents of China and Russia held their first in-person meeting in 2 years this month. Vladimir Putin went all the way to Beijing on the invitation of the Chinese President Xi Jinping. The meeting took place just ahead of the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games and on the backdrop of escalating tensions with the West over, of course, the Ukraine conflict. Vladimir Putin, presidents. Now, the leaders hailed Russia's unprecedented ties with China and even confirmed its readiness to continue working on the Chinese proposed Global Development Initiative. Most importantly, the two countries issued a joint statement paving way for a new type of international accommodation featuring multipolarity, international law-based world order, self-determination and mutually beneficial cooperation. The joint statement opposed the imposition of unilateral approaches in addressing global issues, interference in the internal affairs of other states, infringement of legitimate rights, unilateral sanctions and confrontation between major world powers. The deepening of ties between the two giants comes at a time of spiraling tensions in the Western Bloc, and experts believe that these two countries are likely to remain strongly aligned in the coming years to pursue their common interest. The rivalry strategies and competition are perceived to unbolt a new era of international relations. Now, for more on this story, we are now being joined live by the senior editor of Welt, Daniel Dinelbaumer from Berlin. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us on WION. My first question to you, as global leaders discuss the Ukraine conflict, China has openly blamed the West for creating an alarm over European security, calling out the US for acting against globalization. Tell us more about the same and your thoughts.
First of all, thanks for having me. Actually, what you said was also reflected at the Munich Security Conference, from which you just showed footage, where China's foreign minister Wang Yi actually came, interestingly, to stress that China was in favor of international rules and negotiated solutions. And the security experts and politicians in the audience asked him that if this was China's position, how was it possible that China actually supports Russia's stance on Ukraine, which at the moment is threatening to overrun Ukraine's borders. And of course, not respecting borders means disrespect for the basic foundations of foreign policy. And interestingly, Wang Yi didn't really have a reply to that. All he said was that it was a lie to say that China is helping in provocation. And he actually then pointed to the Minsk agreement between Russia and Ukraine, which should be implemented, which is a far softer tone than the one that Vladimir Putin is striking. So I have the feeling that
please continue.
Tried to navigate here.
Right. Now, Daniel, Ukraine says that it is preparing to deal with every possible scenario as the US warns that a Russian invasion could come in any time, in fact, in the next few days. How are the leaders gathering in Munich viewing this Russian threat?
Well, it's a difficult situation because what maybe the Ukrainians would hope that is that there would be a direct Western intervention. This will not happen, because if NATO would intervene directly into such a conflict, it could strike a world war. What has been made clear, amongst others, by Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, speaking in Munich, was that severe sanctions were already prepared. What she said could be interpreted as that there would be sanctions against Russian banks, maybe even SWIFT sanctions, which means cutting off Russia from the international payment system, the way it has been done with Iran, with crippling consequences, one has to say, and also personal sanctions against members of the Russian elite, which would be particularly damaging.
Right, just taking off from what you just said, Daniel, weeks of diplomacy have failed to create a solution, or a resolution rather, and Russia has still maintained that it is not going to invade Ukraine, yet the US is raising an alarm. In fact, as you just mentioned, the US Vice President Kamala Harris has now threatened of unprecedented sanctions. So what lies ahead? Will this crisis see some kind of diplomatic resolution in your viewpoint?
I would hope that, and everybody does hope that, and Russia says that. But if you talk to the people who make the decisions and talk to the Kremlin, you don't become very optimistic. Yesterday, I did an interview with British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, who, of course, is part of the negotiations. And she says she would want diplomacy to hold the day, but she becomes very pessimistic and thinks that a Russian invasion is becoming very, very likely.
Right, Daniel, thank you so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour.
Thank you.
WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.